Thank you for attending the Prodec Networks and Watchful webinar this morning. I really appreciate you taking time out of your day to attend that. Over the next 90 minutes, we'd like to provide you with an informative, hopefully interesting and entertaining overview on Prodec Networks, Watchful, RightsWATCH, and how we see the industry going and some of the concerns which we've been told by our clients are out there. We'd like to also show you the way that, very simply, Watchful, using their RightsWATCH software, all of those concerns, be they from compliance, just through to data from a business point of view. So, kicking off, just like to touch on data. Where did it get complicated and why has it got complicated? Taking you back to the very early days, if I wanted to create a document, and that document to be shared, I went to somewhere like this. I went to a typing pool. I gave them a handwritten note, and they turned that into a letter which I signed and then was posted. A copy of that letter was kept in a filing cabinet. And we had a physical entity, something which we could lick, something we could touch, something which we could feel. That was secured by physical security. We employed locks on doors. That changed. It changed with the advent of the computer and the ability for each individual to create their own documents. The first computers were not a lot different from typewriters. You still had to store it to a physical medium. And whilst you could archive that physical medium, you could print, you still resorted to storing it into a physical vault. And again, we're back to my security guard. That physical piece of information, that piece of material, was guarded, was secure. You knew where it was at all times. You knew you handed it to somebody to deliver. You knew it was delivered to the person who it was meant for, and that person read, consumed, and it was his responsibility to what they did with it after then. What really changed was the ability, with the internet, to send a piece of information unchallenged, unauthorized, to anybody who had the ability to receive that, with no checks or balances in place. It gave us a problem. First of all, my physical security guard couldn't protect us anymore. He couldn't follow every single piece of electronic data. He had to just sit there behind his desk, looking at his empty filing cabinets, and you as a business had to hope that your staff were sending the information to the right people, were not misusing that information or misusing your trust. So what did? We got rid of the security guard, and we built physical boundaries around our data. We put in firewalls. We put in complex two-factor authentication. We put in loads of perimeter security, which protected us as a business, but actually didn't protect the fundamental issue that you had information coming out of your business to be consumed by others, with, again, no checks, controls, or balances on there. My security guard couldn't protect that. So we had an open gateway. I had an area where, as a business, I could send anything out I wanted to, safe in the knowledge that really my data was protected to a certain degree behind my firewalls. But once it was out of my physical control, what did I do with it? How did I maintain it? How did I manage the authenticity of that information? How did I manage the fact that the people who were reading it, who were controlling it, who were making decisions on it, those people are actually the right people? Everything's about to change. It changed because people really understood the value of data. They understood the value of data not only internally from a business, and we all have marketing departments, and we all have sales departments, and we all have people who on a daily basis analyze every single piece of information that comes into our business and puts a value on that information. How much is it going to help me improve my service offerings to my customer? How much is it going to increase my brand awareness? But this data also has a value to other people. My firewalls will protect from people trying to hack me, but we've all read in the papers about people being hacked and information going, or people leaving laptops on trains, those sort of things. How am I actually going to protect myself and my data from that? It's not only the people who are malicious looking for us. What about our clumsy staff? What about the people who inadvertently send a confidential email to a Hotmail address because they've got 2 addresses for an individual? Or we've got 7 Kevins in our email address book, and we send it to the wrong Kevin, and that Kevin happens to be a competitor. How do we control that? How do we turn around and say, that piece of information which I have generated, I'm going to send it to somebody, and only that person can look at it, can consume it, can read it, can do anything with it. And by the way, I can dictate to them at point of creation what they can do with that document. Let's talk also about the disgruntled employee, the dishonest employee, or the employee that has decided to leave, or we have asked them to leave. What does she have in her box there? Is there USB keys full of data? Is there our company database? Really need to understand what we're dealing with, how we're dealing with it, and the number of reasons why people would want your information. And then we have Snowden. We have somebody with an alternative agenda, yeah, who comes over pieces of information and says, well, hang on a minute, this is not right. I want this to be in the public domain. It's not really his choice whether that's in the public domain. It's your choice as the person who consumes the information, who owns that data. So how do I protect myself against the honest employee who's made a mistake, the disgruntled employee who thinks I'm going to get back on them, the person who's leaving and wants to feather their nest because I've got a database, I've got all my existing clients, I want to be able to go in there and add value to my new employer. And how do I do this for compliance? A lot of where we have to be PCI compliant, or we're in industries where we're ISO 27001. How do we use the technology which is available, and how do we use the technology available from RightsWATCH to actually do this and to make it easy for ourselves? How do we do it regardless of the device which we create that information on? And how do we do it being able to consume that information, okay, which has already been encrypted by somebody in our organization? How do we do it simply? How do we do it easily? And how do we make it quick? And how do we make it seamless? But always doing it at the point of creation. There is absolutely no point in doing it if you've already created the document and you now turn and say, what do I have to do to this document? Let's actually do it when we sit there, when we're typing, as it's going along, and do it with companies' rules, policies in place. And have a dynamic classification. As we're starting to create that document, it may be a public document, and then we may start typing some words in there which turn it into a classified document. My honest employee may not realize he's given anything away. So how do we actually get this to work? And how do we get it to work without getting my key staff pulling their hair out? If we're putting barriers in place, if we're making things difficult, it will never, ever be used. So what we have to do as organizations, and what we have to do is use the technologies which makes it seamlessly available to our staff for them to be able to comply to our company policies and procedures without them even thinking about it, seamlessly in the background. And before I hand over and we go through a little bit more in depth about the background which I've laid out here, I'm going to leave you with a quote from somebody you may recognize, Richard Branson. And I think it sums up what we're trying to do today here. We're trying to take all the complexity out of something, make it simple, make it seamless, and make it easy. So good news, as I finish talking now, I'm going to hand you over to somebody who knows a lot more about this than I do. And we're going to now just look in depth at the Watchful RightsWATCH software, give you a little bit more insight into where it's come from and the industry and why it's important. And then we're going to finish off with an online demo and any questions and answers. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Kevin. Summed it up pretty well there. My name's Keith. I'm Keith Christie-Smith. I'm the Regional Sales Director from Watchful Software. And I guess I'm going to take what Kevin's shown you there and show you how we put that into practice and how simple it is to actually address those issues that Kevin has brought to light. So who are Watchful Software? Watchful Software, we're obviously a software vendor. We've got a global presence. We're headquartered out of the US with offices and product development in Lisbon and based in London as well. We have two products. The first being RightsWATCH, which is what we're here to speak about today, and then we've got TypeWatch as well, which is an e-biometrics technology which learns the way users type and it can lock people out if it finds out that they're not the authenticated user for that endpoint. I just want to go through a couple of slides on some market reports that were recently released, generated from the US, from a company called Market Connections, but it was actually a global survey that was undertaken by more than 5,000 CISOs in various different verticals. And as you can see, right at the top of everyone's concerns, out of all of those 5,000 CISOs, was the careless or untrained insiders, and then fifth being the actual malicious insider. We can see that is also up from 11% last year. The actual careless or untrained insiders in the previous report in 2014 was actually third on the list. So it's becoming more prevalent. The more high-profile data leaks we seem to see in the marketplace. And as you can see, this continues to rise year on year. So 62% of all the CISOs think they had an insider attack. And that's only the 62% who potentially know whether they have or not. That's not to say in that pool. So the market problem is a real and tangible one. I mean, we've put some figures together, which was off the back of the Eponomon Institute reports, which was done beginning of, and you can see there's a quantifiable cost to a data breach, whether that be from external attack, whether that be from internal insider threats, whether that's malicious, whether that's careless or untrained insiders. It's not really relevant at this point. There is, what we are trying to address here and what we're trying to get across is that there is a quantifiable cost that would be associated with every data breach. And in some organizations, it may be larger than 3.79 million. In some, yes, sure, it may be less. And look, these are, Kevin touched on Edward Snowden, but these are just a few more examples. G20 summits where Barack Obama's passport information was leaked by an admin person that worked in the Australian government. HSBC, one of their disgruntled employees, sent an Excel spreadsheet to the press. Sony, I think most people have heard and know about the Sony issues. So I guess what we're saying is, look, why is it so hard? You've had this network, you've secured it with the perimeter, with firewalls and two-factor authentication and IDS solutions, IPS solutions, and you've layered on this multi-layer security model. But the issue is what that's not taking into consideration is the users that are sitting within this network, and they're sending content out to external recipients, or maybe they're taking that content on BYOD devices, mobile devices, laptops, potentially leaving those laptops on trains. They're using cloud platforms, Box, Dropbox, OneDrive, WeTransfer. And then you've got your remote workers as well, or remote offices where you may not have IT infrastructure. They may all connect into a centralized IT infrastructure, whether that be in the cloud or on-premise. So what we're saying is, rather than having your network perimeter as a fence, it's have bodyguards that go with all of your data. So regardless of where your data resides, no matter what platform it is, if it's sensitive, encrypt it, protect it, classify it based on the sensitivity of the data itself. So we say the new network perimeter is no longer your IT infrastructure or your environment, everything that sits behind your network firewall. The new perimeter is actually your assets, your emails, your Word documents, your Excel spreadsheets, and it's also securing that information regardless of what platform it sits on. So how can you do this? First thing is identify your data. Identify how sensitive it is. If it's PCI information, PII information, personal health information, or just general intellectual property that the organization is wanting to restrict from flowing potentially to competitors or out to the marketplace as well. Once you've identified your data, it's then classifying it. So really then taking it one step further by putting in headers, footers, watermarks, metadata tagging, so that you're really decreasing corporate liability by seeming to be doing as much as possible, with the ability to also then block that data at that point from flowing outside the organization. And then you've got the ability to apply encryption. Based on the classification level, we can apply encryption, AES 256-bit encryption, encrypt the email bodies, attachments, files, and we can also write policies based on context as well. So regardless of where those files then reside, we can then apply a policy as well. And then the ability to track and report. So through a central admin portal, the ability to push out all of your policies from a sysadmin perspective, as well as then reports on every time any classified content is read, anytime an action is performed on any of that data, and report that into a SQL database so that the business then can build reports and build some models off of the back of that. So now I'm going to get into a bit of a demo. So this is my laptop. It's what I use day in, day out. It's not a demo platform. So what you can see here is actually our internal corporate policy. So the buttons, the languages, the tooltips, that would all be customized based on your potential corporate policy or classification policy. The first thing you see when I open up Outlook is what we refer to as our in-workflow interface. Okay. If I now start typing, so if I type an email, who's our product development director, we're applying a fairly simple rule here based on the fact that Rui's an internal user. We're in the same company. He has the same domain name as I do. So we're marking this email as Watchful internal. Regardless of what data I then put in the email, so long as it's not sensitive or it's not invoking another rule or policy, that email will remain as Watchful internal. I can see that we've changed the color here. So as a user, I can see that something's actually happening in the background. A policy is being applied, rules being enforced. I can then click here at the bottom where it says more help. And I can see exactly what, based on this classification level, which is being internal in this case, I can see exactly what information should be classified at that level. Okay, so this is a really good tip for really driving user adoption within your user environments. The ability to educate the users, so not only enforcing a policy, but educating the users on why you're actually doing that. So as they're working on that content, they can see the colors changing. They can view the tooltips to see exactly what policy is being applied and potentially who's going to have access to that. I can also then click at the bottom and see, look, what is my role within the organization as middle management, as you can see, and what's my permission going to be with this content. Okay, I can see what the offline period is as well, so we can set offline periods for data. So in this case, it's internal; it's not really sensitive to the organization. So we can go ahead. I can go ahead and send this to Rui. He'll have access to this for 5 days if he's offline for whatever reason on his laptop. But after 5 days, the clock runs out. Then Rui will lose access to all the email and all the data that resides on his laptop that is classified as internal. This offline period is stipulated per classification level, as are the permissions. So when we go through, and if I put in some confidential information into this email, and you see we upgrade the classification level, again changing the colors, additional tooltips. So we're really trying to get the user's attention when we're making these changes. Again, the classification level being confidential in this case, we're updating the policy. If I now click, what does this mean at the bottom? I can see now my role remains the same. I'm still the same person, but my permissions with confidential changed. So the business don't want me to export that. They don't want me to print it or reclassify. I can still work with it. I can reply to emails, but ultimately we're starting to build in some restrictions. Okay, and we can see the offline set to 1 day. Some classification levels, the offline period may be 0 days, in which case I have to be online and I have to be connected to the corporate network to be able to view that content. Say if I'm replying to an RFP, or if I'm working on some sensitive pricing information or some new feature requests, which we don't want to get out to the market before the product gets released. All of that information may have an offline period of 0 days, so that you can actually ensure that people aren't accessing that on trains or aeroplanes, or even if they're leaving forget their laptop stolen or their mobile gets stolen, then all of that content is actually rendered useless should the person not be able to connect into the corporate network for whatever reason. Okay. We've got the ability to downgrade classification levels because the organization have allowed me the right to do so. We can restrict this, so we can enforce it, in which case the buttons would be grayed out. So the only way I would be able to know on that, able to reclassify, is if I was to remove the content, in which case the system will go through and it will automatically reclassify that email. So maybe if I've read the tooltip and read that an external recipient's not going to be able to view the content. But if I put my information back, bearing in mind this could be credit card information, social security numbers, customer names, customer numbers. This could be anything that the organization would want to write a policy about. You can see we've now, if I go and click internal, you can see we've now grayed out the send button. So I can't actually send this until I click a digital disclaimer, so for non-repudiation. So me as a user, I'm accepting responsibility for my actions. So say I'm working, it's 9 or 10 o'clock at night, I'm working on a proposal, and I need to get this off to a customer, or I'm replying to something and there's a deadline, and I know there's not going to be anyone in IT. We're allowing the users to, I guess, make a decision for themselves. But what we are going to do is we're going to write that into our SQL database, and we can report on that as well. You can build workflow in, so a copy of that email or a copy of that file or the attachment could be sent to someone in the security department. When they get in first thing in the morning and they see that that's gone off, maybe it's sensitive information that's inadvertently been sent to a competitor or one of your customers that shouldn't have received that data. The user at that point, or the person receiving that email, has the ability to log into an admin interface and blacklist that content. So regardless of whether that user is internal or external, when they double-click that file or they double-click that email, and we call and the file calls home for a key request, we intercept that key request and we kill it. So that file is then at that point rendered useless, and that's rendered useless to the recipient as well as potentially people within the organization, the people that are generating that content as well. So if I click no, it will revert back to the previous version. If I click yes, it will now allow me to send this. And my colleague Rui will receive this email and he'll be able to work with it based on the rules and policies that have been applied at the internal classification level. Okay. It's worth noting there are actually additional buttons here that I don't get to see. So I'm in middle management. I get to classify information as public, internal, and confidential. I know that we have secret and top secret. I can consume some of that content, but I can't actually do anything with it. The organization have said, right, your role within the organization means that you don't need to classify anything as secret or top secret, but we're giving you the ability to read it. So if I'm getting emails from Rui, who's our product development director, about the new product, the new version of RightsWATCH, I can consume that, but I couldn't forward it on to a competitor. I can't forward it on to an external email address. All I can do is I can review that. I can't print it. I can't screen print it. There's very little I can actually do with that. But that's all defined by the organization, and it's defined by these policies here. It's what's my role, and every organization would be carved up into multiple roles, and then what what access do I want each person in each of those roles to be able to do. So for some people in our organization, they may have some restrictions here for internal, but for my role, I've got full access. Okay. We've also got the ability to break out into different scopes. So here I've got a scope for sending content to external recipients. Maybe I want to send an email to one of our partners with some discounted pricing in it, as an example. I can send that through and I can apply a policy so that I'm restricting the copy, print, export, forward, so that, again, that recipient will be able to consume that, but ultimately not be able to do anything further with that. Or we can break it out into, so this is Project X, which is a new version of RightsWATCH, but this could be an M&A project where you wanted to have a specific amount of users that are working on a specific set of data that no one else has access to in the organization. Or scopes could be broken out into organizational units. Rather than this saying Project X, that could be human resources, marketing, could be sales. The benefit of scopes being we can delegate access to our admin interface to someone within that scope. So ultimately, the IT team or the security team aren't defining policies for every part of the organization. So when, say, a head of or project manager of an M&A project, he can go and he can define the labels, what he wants these labels to be called. He would define the colors. He would define the tooltips in here as well. He would define who has access to which buttons, when they get added to this particular scope or project, when they get removed from that scope or project. So they can then get very granular into what they can and can't do. So that's email, pretty briefly, and that's just some of the policies and rules that we have enabled. Policies or data classification policies. So I'm going to show you Word just because it's the easiest to demo, but we've got the same functionality in watermarking and metadata tagging throughout the entire Office and PDF suite. And then we can work with third-party file types as well, which I'll show you in a couple of minutes on the demo. So if I now go into File, Save As, and I'll just save this onto my desktop, you'll see we've put in no sensitive information. It's just lorem ipsum. So in our in-workflow interface here, you'll see I've got the same access to the same scopes and same classification levels, again defined by my role in the organization. We've automatically marked this as public in this case because there's no sensitive information. This default classification level is defined by my role as well. So you may want to have, if you had organizational units, you may want to have a different default level for people in HR or people in sales, or maybe you just had 3 or 4 different buttons. You didn't use scopes and you had that disabled. You could still define a different classification level based on the user's role within the organization. So if I now go and put in some sensitive information, again, this could be any PCI, PII, PHI information. If I go and save this and save as again onto my desktop, you'll see now we've picked up the content in there, which was again my WSW, Watchful Software Confidential, and we're applying a policy. We're dropping in an additional tooltip here as well. We're trying to really drive the user's attention to the fact that we are applying a policy here. Again, I can go in and I can read and see why that policy is being applied and potentially remove content before saving it or sending it on based on the classification level. So I'm going to save this time. And the first thing you'll see pop up is we include only. We have a watermark. We could have text in the bottom, text up or down either side of this document. We can pull through images. We can have this text positioned pretty much anywhere in any color or font on the page. I can click at the top here. I can see, because we're applying encryption, I can see, right, who's the user that's created this. In this case, that's me, Keith Christie Smith. What's the classification level? Watchful Software being the company, Watchful being the scope, and confidential being the classification level. And then what are my permissions? Again, I can see this. I've got full permissions. If I was to save this into a network share that, say, everyone in the organization had access to, only people who could view and review confidential information would be able to open this. Okay. If I now close out of that Word document, I'm going to right-click on this document one. I'll go into the properties, and you'll see. So this is the metadata tagging that I touched on briefly a little bit earlier. So again, based on the classification level, and we're applying a GUID number as well, so a unique identifier that gets assigned to every single email or file that gets classified and encrypted. And we can use these metadata strings to then program or reverse engineer a DLP solution, a DLP agent, an email security gateway, a firewall solution, anything that can read metadata at the network perimeter. We can then program these metadata tags in as a failsafe to then block that content from flowing outside the organization. We've also got the ability to restrict based on the file attachments. So let's say I'm sending this email to Kevin, who was chatting from Prodec a little earlier on. We are then marking this as external do not disclose, which was my default external email classification, because we don't want to apply encryption. We're just doing the headers, footers, watermarks, and metadata tagging based on the fact that Kevin has a prodec.co.uk email address. Maybe this is because I'm leaving and I'm going to go work for Prodec and I'm wanting to send some sensitive pricing information or some sensitive customer information. And I'm saying to Kevin, look, this is a joke email because I just want to get this outside the organization because I'm leaving at the end of the day. When I click send, we read the attachment and we read the content and we read the metadata of the actual attachment, and we're blocking send. We're saying, look, the attachments, one or more of the attachments have a higher confidentiality level than the one that you've selected, and as such we're cancelling the send operation. For me to be able to send this, I would have to classify this at the same level, which would be watchful confidential. The system will now allow me to send it. Kevin will receive an encrypted email, and because our policy for watchful, the scope watchful and confidential, dictates that external recipients can't review this content, Kevin won't be able to open that content as an external recipient. Okay. We've also got the ability to work with third-party file types. So I have a folder here with an exe, an MP4, JPEG, and some other files. Have CAD drawings. It could be PowerPoint drawings. It could be any third-party file types, anything outside of the Microsoft Office and PDF stacks. I've got the ability to right-click and click Classify with RightsWATCH. And what you see is this is a client-side version. It's manual classification. It's something you'd probably give to your marketing department so that they can classify documents or classify projects and encrypt the data. So if they are distributing videos or content out to the organization, that can't be sent to other third-party organizations. It could be a manager within a department that has access to this, that can because they want to bulk classify manually files on, say, their file shares or folders that they have access to, or even data on their endpoint. We've got a server-side component to this, to the Global Protector, which does two things. The first thing we do is we're not an e-discovery tool, so we won't tell you where your data is, but if you point us to the file server or to your file servers, your e-filers, we'll go through, based on the policies you've defined at a sysadmin level, we'll churn through all of your historic data and we'll classify it to the same level. So we'll read it, we open it, we view the content, we apply the headers, footers, watermarks, metadata tagging, and encryption as well, if you're invoking encryption at that point, to that historic data. And the second thing we can do is we can monitor folders or servers, and regardless of file type or file size or the content, we can apply policy. So you could say, right, for every file that's dropped into a development folder or to a finance folder, we want it to be automatically classified as confidential, secret, or top secret, or level 1, 2, 3, whatever you wanted those labels to be. And that we can do automatically, or it can be done at a schedule as well. So if I now click OK and mark these, bearing in mind I've marked these as confidential, you see it's saying no rule to apply. So we've not stipulated any specific rules in our admin interface for any of these file types or file sizes or any of the metadata that we could potentially pick up from these files. You can see we've now put in some padlocks here, and we're leveraging what Microsoft refer to as their P-file technology. So rather than this being a JPEG, it's now a PJPEG, a protected JPEG, or an exe.p file, or an mp4.p file. So if I now double-click this, we'll render that JPEG in the RMS sharing app. So you can now see we've classified this as confidential. I can see my permissions. I've got full permissions with this file, and it's encrypted. So again, if I was to send this out to everyone in the organization, only people who have access to confidential information will be able to view this. Okay. Let's say it's a file that we can't, or the Microsoft RMS sharing app, which we distribute with our software, can't actually open or render. So maybe a CAD drawing or a Photoshop file, or maybe some development data. We can then render that using the default application on the PC, and we just open that in read-only mode. If I wanted to declassify that information, again, I could do that. It would just be a reverse of what I've just done. Through the global protector, I can select, in this case, maybe public, go through, we'll churn through again all of the data. If there's any rules to be applied, again, they would be applied at that point. So maybe I couldn't downgrade some of this content from confidential to public in this case. And you can see we've now, the file extensions have gone back to the previous file extensions, and it'll just render in the default application. And that's it for my demo. I promise only a couple more slides, and then we've got the ability. I think we've still got a couple of minutes for a few questions if anyone has any. So this is just a slide to show a bit of the market recognition that we've had the last couple of years. We were recently ranked as a technology leader in KuppingerCole's data classification report. We've had some plaudits from Dan Plastina, who heads up the Microsoft Rights Management Group in Redmond in the US, and then one from 2014, which was just the 451 group. So what's in it for you as an organization? I guess it's increased security is probably the most important point we want you to take away from today. Compliance as well. So for some organizations where compliance is fairly heavily driven, we can apply and we can assist from a compliance perspective because of our reporting functionality and because of the ability we can cover all the legacy documents and data and information. Increasing your productivity. So we're not asking users to click pop-ups or type any text to be able to input metadata fields, or we're not asking users to do anything. All the rules and policies are applied automatically. And then decrease costs, largely due to one of my first slides, which was regarding the cost of a data breach, but ultimately through user training as well. So the ability to, through our tooltips, educate your users rather than having to sit in front of every single user within the organization and show them how to use the particular technology. So don't take my word for it. We offer proof of concepts through our partners such as Prodec Networks, as well as more technical demonstrations. Today we've just shown you the user interface. But yeah, as I said, please don't take my word for it. Please get in touch with either myself, my details were on the first slide, or Prodec Networks, who actually invited you along, who are one of our partners. Thank you very much. Has anyone got any questions? Sorry, questions are typed in the box on the right-hand side. Okay, well, thank you very much. I don't think there's any questions. Have a good day, and thank you very much for your time. Goodbye.